I used to work night shifts at a mid-sized hospital just outside Columbus. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and the quiet hours meant fewer interactions, which I preferred. Most nights were routine, maybe a fall in the hallway or a confused patient pressing the call button too many times. But there were parts of that hospital that never stopped feeling wrong to me. There were 2 wings on the 3rd floor that had been sealed off since before I started. One of them was for renovation, supposedly. The other had no explanation, just heavy steel doors with badge scanners that never lit up. No one ever talked about that side of the floor unless a patient brought it up first. I first heard about it during my 2nd week. An elderly woman in room 312 kept glancing toward the hallway like she was expecting something. I asked if she needed anything and she whispered, "They come out at night, from the locked rooms." I thought maybe it was dementia, but her eyes were sharp and steady. I tried asking around during lunch one night, casually mentioning the locked wing. Most nurses shrugged or gave vague answers like, "It's just storage now," or "old psych unit, not used anymore." But when I asked Kevin, a janitor who'd been there 10 years, he froze mid-bite. "Don't go poking around," he said, "especially during your shift." After that, I started paying attention to the patients. A few mentioned hearing things from behind the locked doors, tapping, or what sounded like dragging. One guy even claimed he saw someone walk out, but when staff checked the hall, it was empty. It always got dismissed as medication side effects or sleep paralysis. But the oddest thing was how the hallway lights flickered every night at 3:17 a.m. Not 3:15, not 3:30, always exactly 3:17. Just the section of hallway that faced the locked rooms, never anywhere else in the building. I asked maintenance to check it once, and they said the wiring was fine. One night, I got curious enough to stand near the entrance to that wing just before 3:17. I turned off my walkie to avoid distraction and leaned against the wall watching. When the lights flickered, it wasn't just a buzz. It was like everything dipped in and out of reality for a second. It made my stomach turn. The worst part was the sound. It was faint, but there, like a breath or shuffle on the other side of the metal door. I stayed frozen in place, listening. After a few seconds, it stopped, and then the silence was even worse than the sound. That night, I dreamed I was walking the locked wing. The walls were peeling and there were no windows, just door after door with no handles. Something was behind them, but I couldn't move fast enough. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The next night, I almost didn't show up. I told myself it was just a dream, and the whispers were patients trying to make sense of being stuck in a hospital. Still, I felt a weird pressure in my chest as soon as I stepped through the automatic doors. The building always smelled faintly of antiseptic, but that night it felt heavier, like something was waiting. My rounds were normal until I reached room 314. A new patient had been admitted, middle-aged with a broken hip from a fall. He was staring at the ceiling and muttering when I walked in. At first I thought he was talking in his sleep, but then I heard the word "door" mixed in. I leaned closer, asking him what he said. He blinked slowly, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "They leave it cracked sometimes, just enough to watch." I stepped back, unsure if he was lucid or dreaming. "You don't hear them yet?" he asked. I told the charge nurse, but she shrugged it off. "Patients say all kinds of weird things at night," she said, barely glancing up from her paperwork. But I couldn't shake it, especially when I noticed the security camera above the locked wing door had been unplugged. No sign of maintenance or anyone else touching it. That same hallway was ice cold again when I passed through after 3 a.m. The badge scanner on the locked door flashed red when I walked by, even though I wasn't carrying any access card. It didn't do that before. I stopped, watching the scanner blink, and then the light went out. I turned and walked away fast, pretending I hadn't noticed. But that scanner going dark, it felt like someone on the other side had noticed me. I kept glancing behind me the rest of the night, half expecting footsteps that never came. My shift ended, but the weight of that moment stayed with me. 2 days later, I was off duty but couldn't stop thinking about it. I came in during daylight hours and made an excuse to check the camera feeds. Most showed empty halls and nurses going about their routines. But at exactly 3:17 a.m. the night before, the feed outside the locked wing glitched. It was just for a second, but something passed by the lens, low to the ground like a person crawling. The frame warped slightly, almost like heat waves, and then the footage cut out until 3:19. I rewound it 3 times. Every time, the distortion hit the same second. I went back to Kevin, the janitor. This time, I didn't joke. I just said, "What's behind the doors?" He paused, his hands tightening around his mop. "Not what," he whispered. "Who?" And they weren't always locked in. I didn't ask any more questions after that. Whatever Kevin meant by, "they weren't always locked in," I didn't want to know. But something shifted that night. The whole hospital felt different, quieter in the wrong way, like sound was being held back. Around 2:45 a.m., I went to deliver meds to a patient on the second floor. As I stepped off the elevator, the lights in the hallway flickered and buzzed once. Every door on that side was closed, except one, near the end. It was room 318, the one next to the sealed wing. The air got cold as I approached, colder than before. The door was cracked open, just like the patient said. I stood there, not even sure why I was looking inside. The room was empty, except for a wheelchair facing the wall. Then the wheelchair turned on its own. It didn't roll or jolt, it just slowly rotated like someone was sitting in it, controlling it with invisible hands. I backed up immediately. That's when I heard the whisper. It came from behind me, not from the room. It wasn't a word, it was more like a breath that knew your name. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. Not a nurse, not a soul. I started walking fast, trying to act calm, but I could feel it now, the sense of something walking just behind me. I returned to the central desk, but before I could speak, the hallway monitor went blank again. Same wing, same time. But this time, there was no crawling figure. Just the feed slowly dimming until the screen was pure black. Then a handprint appeared, pressed on the lens from inside. The next morning, I requested a transfer. I didn't give a reason, I didn't need to. The supervisor just nodded like he understood more than he let on. As I was cleaning out my locker, Kevin passed by and said, "They notice who notices them." I haven't stepped foot in that hospital since. Sometimes I still dream about those halls, the scanner light blinking, the chair turning, the cold air wrapping around my neck. I wake up wondering if I ever actually left. Some nights I'm not so sure. Whatever's in those locked rooms, it's not waiting to escape. It's watching, listening, picking out who pays attention. I don't think the doors are locked to keep us out. I think they're locked to keep them entertained. And they're very, very bored. It started with my neighbor vanishing without a trace. One day he was there, tending his garden as usual, and the next, completely gone. The kind of disappearance that leaves a knot in your stomach and a dozen questions with no answers. His lawn, once neat and welcoming, had grown wild and eerie in his absence. People in the neighborhood whispered, but no one seemed to want to investigate too closely. I often walked past his house, curiosity gnawing at me, but something about the place made me hesitate. It wasn't just the silence that felt off. It was the garden, strange and unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. Something was definitely wrong there. One evening, I finally dared to take a closer look. The front gate was ajar, creaking softly in the breeze, inviting yet menacing. I stepped inside and noticed odd markings scratched into the soil, arranged in circular patterns that looked ancient or ritualistic. Bones, small animal bones, were scattered throughout the dirt, as if deliberately placed. I tried to convince myself it was just some weird hobby or a prank by neighborhood kids. But every time I passed by, the garden seemed to change slightly, the symbols rearranged or more bones added. No one else seemed to notice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from behind the darkened windows. My curiosity turned to unease when I found a small journal on the porch, half buried under leaves. Its pages were filled with cryptic notes about rituals, protection, and warnings against unseen forces. The handwriting was shaky, desperate even. It made me wonder what kind of trouble my neighbor had gotten into before he disappeared. I spent nights thinking about the garden, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures and whispers just out of earshot. The more I dwelled on it, the more real the fear became. I started noticing strange footprints in the dirt, too large to be an animal, but no signs of human visitors. It was as if something was living there, hiding in plain sight. Despite all this, I felt trapped by my own curiosity, unable to turn away from the mystery. The house next door, once so ordinary, had become a puzzle with missing pieces. Each visit to the garden left me with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that I wasn't alone in watching the strange changes. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? A man gone without a trace, a garden full of bizarre symbols and bones, and an invisible presence stalking the night. It all sounded like the beginning of a horror story, but it was my reality, and I feared the ending wasn't going to be a happy one. The nights grew colder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. I started keeping a flashlight on me whenever I walked past that garden, even during the day. The symbols glowed faintly under the moonlight, or maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Either way, I couldn't ignore the growing dread that settled in my chest. One evening, I noticed something new, an old wooden box partially buried near the garden shed. It wasn't there before, at least I didn't remember seeing it. I hesitated but eventually pulled it out, my hands trembling. Inside were more bones, but these were larger, possibly from a small animal or even a bird tied together with frayed twine. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my neighbor vanished and left behind a garden full of strange symbols and bones. They'd probably think I was crazy. Instead, I tried to dig deeper on my own, searching online for any history about the house or past owners. What I found was unsettling, a series of disappearances spanning decades, all linked to the same property. Despite my fear, I started talking to other neighbors, hoping to piece together the story. Most were reluctant, quick to change the subject or dismiss the incidents as urban legend. But one elderly woman, Mrs. Clark, hinted at a darker truth. She mentioned strange rituals and warnings whispered by previous residents who had fled suddenly. She warned me to stay away, saying the house was cursed and that those symbols were meant to keep something bound. The more she spoke, the heavier the weight of those words felt on my shoulders. It was clear this wasn't just a simple mystery anymore. Something malevolent seemed tied to that place, and it was waiting. My sleep became restless, haunted by fragmented nightmares of clawing hands beneath the earth and hollow eyes staring from the shadows. I woke several times to the sound of scratching coming from the basement of my own house, though I was alone. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I started questioning what was truly out there. Each day brought more signs that I wasn't alone in my obsession. At work, I caught myself zoning out, my mind racing back to the garden. I even began hearing faint whispers in my apartment, like the wind carrying voices I couldn't quite understand. Was it paranoia, or had whatever haunted that garden followed me home? The house next door sat silent, windows dark, but I knew the garden wasn't dormant. Something moved beneath the soil, beneath the surface of my sanity. I had to find answers, even if it meant facing the darkness that my neighbor had disappeared into. My curiosity was no longer a choice, it was a necessity. The night I decided to confront the garden, I brought gloves and a crowbar, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the crunch of dead leaves beneath my feet. As I approached the strange symbols carved deep into the earth, I felt a cold wave wash over me, like something unseen was warning me away. I began digging near the largest symbol, the ground soft and damp from recent rain. After a few minutes, my fingers brushed against something hard, a small rusted metal box. Inside were more bones, but this time they were arranged carefully, almost like an offering. Among them lay a tattered piece of paper with writing so faded it was barely legible. My hands shook as I read the words, a chilling message warning anyone who found it to leave before the curse awakens. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural noise coming from the shadows behind the fence. Frozen, I turned slowly but saw nothing. The hairs on my neck stood on end as the garden seemed to pulse with a sinister life of its own. The next morning, I brought my findings to the local historical society, hoping someone could shed light on the curse. The woman there grew pale as she examined the symbols and the note. She told me stories of occult practices in the area, cults that believed in harnessing power from the earth itself by binding spirits in ritualistic graves. She warned me that those bones were likely part of such a ritual, meant to imprison a restless entity beneath the garden. Breaking the symbols or disturbing the site could release whatever was trapped, something that was best left alone. I left with a sinking feeling, realizing I was dangerously close to something far beyond my understanding. That night I couldn't sleep. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, as if the garden itself was trying to communicate. I heard footsteps outside my window, slow and deliberate, but whenever I looked, there was nothing but empty darkness. My mind teetered on the edge of reason, unsure if I was being watched or if it was all a product of fear. Days passed, and the garden's hold over me only grew stronger. I found myself drawn back there, night after night, compelled to dig deeper despite every warning. Then, one evening, as the moon hid behind clouds, I saw movement. Shadows shifting unnaturally among the plants. A shape emerged, not quite human, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I stumbled backward, heart racing, but the figure didn't chase me. Instead, it vanished into the earth itself, swallowed by the soil like a living nightmare. I knew then that the garden was no ordinary place. It held something ancient and restless, and my neighbor's disappearance was only the beginning. I left town soon after, but the memory of those eyes still haunts me. I've never really believed in things you can't explain. Not ghosts, not demons, not spirits hiding in basements. But last winter changed how I look at silence, especially when it's coming from directly below your feet. It started with my girlfriend Rachel saying she heard someone breathing under the floor. We had just moved into a 2-bedroom rental house outside Pittsburgh. It had an old basement, unfinished, with a low ceiling and a single flickering bulb. We didn't use it for much, just boxes, a washer-dryer, and a shelf of tools left by the last tenant. I remember thinking it smelled like cold cement and rust. Rachel started bringing it up after the first week. "Did you go down there last night?" she asked while brushing her teeth. I said no. She stared at me in the mirror for a long second before saying, "Well, someone did." At first I laughed it off. I told her it was probably the pipes or the water heater cycling on. She didn't look convinced. "I swear I heard footsteps," she said, hugging herself like she was trying to hold something in. Later that night, I lay in bed while Rachel scrolled through her phone beside me. I heard a faint sound, something like shuffling. It was soft, almost like someone dragging their feet over concrete. I turned to Rachel. Her phone was already down. "You hear that?" she whispered. We both sat up, listening. The sound had stopped. I walked to the basement door and flicked the light switch. It buzzed, then stayed dark. "Great," I muttered. The bulb had finally gone out. Rachel didn't say anything, but her eyes stayed locked on the door. The next morning, I replaced the bulb and went down there with a flashlight. The boxes were untouched, and there were no signs of anyone being there. No footprints, no moved items, no hidden doors. Still, I got that heavy feeling in my chest, the kind you get when someone's staring at you. I told Rachel everything was fine. She nodded, but she didn't believe me. That night, she moved her pillow closer to mine and barely slept. Every small sound from downstairs made her flinch. "It's like it knows I'm aware of it," she said at 2 a.m. That sentence stuck with me, the way she said it, not him or someone. I tried to ignore it, but from that night forward, even I started noticing the house felt off. Not loud, not dangerous, just too quiet when it shouldn't be. A few days later, I came home to find Rachel sitting on the couch, knees up, eyes fixed on the basement door. She didn't even blink when I called her name. "It was talking today," she said quietly, like whispering things, but only when I walked past. I checked the basement again that night, this time with a hammer in one hand and my phone flashlight in the other. Nothing. I knocked on the walls, checked under the stairs, opened every box. The only thing that stood out was how cold it was, like the air wasn't circulating right. When I came back up, Rachel was in the kitchen, pacing. She asked, "Did you hear it?" I said no. She looked disappointed, like she needed someone to validate what she was hearing. "It said my name," she whispered. "It knows I live here now." She started refusing to stay home alone. I worked from home for a few days, mostly to make her feel better. Nothing happened while I was there. But the moment I'd leave to grab groceries or get the mail, she said the whispering came back. Always from the basement. One night she lost it. I found her crying in the bathroom with the shower running. "It said you let it in," she told me. "It said you made room for it down there." I told her she was just tired, stressed, but deep down, I was shaken. I even called the landlord asking about the last tenant. He said the guy left suddenly but didn't explain why. "House is old," he added casually. "Sometimes they make noise." It felt like such a weak answer. But what could I really accuse him of? Rachel's behavior started to shift after that night. She got quieter, more withdrawn. She'd wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. and just stare out the window. Once I caught her standing at the basement door, not moving, just listening. When I called her, she jumped like I'd startled her. One morning, I found a note on the table, just 5 words, scribbled in small letters. "Don't go in the basement." She was asleep on the couch, like she'd been too scared to stay upstairs. I picked up the note and felt a strange tightness in my chest. That evening, the light in the basement flickered back on, by itself. Neither of us had touched the switch. Rachel wouldn't even look at it. "It's not hiding anymore," she said under her breath. "It wants you to see it now." That night, I sat up in bed, watching the door to the basement through the cracked hallway light. I didn't sleep. Rachel had curled into herself like she was bracing for something. The air in the apartment felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing against our lungs. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the basement door creaked open. No one was near it. I froze, not even breathing. It opened slowly, inch by inch, until it stood wide like someone was inviting us down. But there was no sound, only that thick, awful silence. Rachel whispered, It's coming up tonight." I asked what she meant, but she wouldn't look at me. "It doesn't want to hide anymore," she said. "It says it's your turn now." Before I could reply, we both heard the faint sound of footsteps, soft, dragging ones. I grabbed the hammer and slowly approached the stairs. The basement was pitch dark again, though the light had been on earlier. I stood at the top step, staring down into the black. The footsteps had stopped. Now it was just silent, but I swear it was waiting. I finally went down. Rachel begged me not to. Each step felt like sinking deeper into water. The smell hit me halfway down, musty, like damp earth and something old. When I reached the bottom, I stood still for a full minute. Then I saw it. There was a figure in the corner, not moving, not breathing, just standing in the deepest shadows. It looked almost human, but off somehow, like its proportions weren't quite right. I whispered, "Who are you?" It didn't speak. It just took one slow step forward. I turned and ran back up the stairs without thinking. Behind me, I heard the steps, not fast, but steady. Something was following, and I could feel it at my back. When I burst through the door and slammed it shut, Rachel was gone from the living room. I found her crouched in the hallway, whispering to herself. I asked what she was doing, and she just smiled faintly. "It talked to you now, right? You finally heard it." Then she walked past me, down the hall, and locked herself in the bedroom. We never opened that door again. I had it nailed shut the next morning. Rachel wouldn't even stay in the same room as the basement wall. Eventually, she moved out. No warning, no fight. Just a single text. "It's yours now. I hope it forgets me." I still live in the apartment. The landlord refuses to do anything about the basement. Some nights, I hear the door creak open again. I never check anymore, but I know whatever's down there is still waiting for me to come back. And sometimes, when I pass by that hallway, I hear it again, just faintly, whispering my name, like it's trying to remind me, this didn't start with Rachel. It's always been here. And now, I've let it see me. I remember the exact night things started to feel wrong between us. My best friend Jake had just gone through a brutal breakup, the kind that leaves a silence hanging in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. At first, I thought the distance was just part of him healing, but soon, his absence wasn't just physical. It felt like he was slipping away from reality. We used to spend hours talking about anything and everything, but after that night, he barely responded to my texts. When I visited his apartment, he'd avoid eye contact, and his smiles seemed forced, like a mask hiding something darker. One evening, after a few drinks, he finally opened up about feeling watched, but he laughed it off like it was nothing. That night, I was worried enough to stay over. Around midnight, I woke up to the faint sound of voices coming from his bedroom. Thinking it was just him on the phone, I didn't want to intrude, so I stayed quiet. But then I heard him speaking, except his voice was soft, strained, and he wasn't talking to anyone on the line. Curiosity got the better of me, so I crept toward his door and pressed my ear against it. The words were muffled but chilling. Jake was whispering to someone, or something, that wasn't there. I could barely make out phrases like, "You can't be real," and "Please just leave me alone." His voice trembled, far from the confident guy I knew. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the room. It wasn't just the moonlight or a trick of the eye. This was a distinct dark shape, almost humanoid, standing just beyond the reach of the lamp's glow. Jake kept talking to it, pleading, and at times his voice cracked with fear. I wanted to burst in, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I stepped back slowly, heart racing, unsure if I had imagined the whole thing. The next morning, Jake acted like nothing had happened. When I tried to bring it up, he laughed it off again, calling it just my imagination, and begged me not to mention it. But I knew something was very wrong. Days passed, and Jake's behavior worsened. He stopped answering calls and rarely left his apartment. When I did manage to see him, his eyes looked hollow, like he was always looking past me into some unseen abyss. I noticed new scratches on his arms and fresh bruises, but he refused to explain them. One afternoon, I found a torn photograph of him and his ex-girlfriend lying on his floor. On the back was a hastily scribbled note saying, "I won't let her go." It felt like a warning or a message from someone else entirely. That's when I started to believe that whatever was in that room wasn't just in Jake's head. I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. That night, I planned to confront him about what I saw. As I approached his apartment, a cold dread settled over me. The silence around his building felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I knocked on his door, but no one answered. After knocking several times, I tried the handle. To my surprise, the door was unlocked. Hesitating, I stepped inside and called out his name, but only silence answered me. The apartment was colder than I remembered, and the air felt thick, like something had settled and refused to leave. I noticed the faint glow of a phone screen in the bedroom. Jake was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, eyes fixated on the device, but not really seeing anything. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through pictures, mostly of happier times with his ex. It was like he was holding on to a ghost. I sat beside him, careful not to startle him. He finally looked up, and I could see the exhaustion etched deep in his face. "I don't know what's happening to me," he whispered. "It's like she's still here, but not the person I loved. Something else. Something worse." The fear in his voice was real, raw, and terrifying. That night, I stayed with him. We talked quietly until exhaustion took us both, but sleep was a stranger to me. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the faint sound of whispering again. This time, it wasn't coming from Jake's room. It was right behind me. I froze, heart pounding, but when I turned, nothing was there. I convinced myself it was nerves and went back to bed. But the whispers grew louder over the next few nights, and Jake's shadowy visitor seemed to get bolder. One evening, I caught a glimpse of that dark figure again, this time clearer, its shape shifting just beyond the corner of my eye. Jake started talking less to me and more to the empty corners of his room. His face grew paler, and his voice became hollow. When I asked what was happening, he would only say, "It's not her anymore. It's something that won't leave until it gets what it wants." One night, Jake disappeared. His apartment was empty except for a single note on the kitchen table. It read, "If you want to find me, don't look for the light." I spent hours searching, feeling the walls close in around me with every unanswered call. The police found him days later in a nearby park, staring blankly at a tree with deep scratch marks carved into its bark. He couldn't explain what happened, and he barely spoke for weeks. I visited as much as I could, but the Jake I knew seemed lost inside himself. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear his voice echoing from that apartment, whispering warnings to stay away. I'm not sure if I'm haunted by what I saw or by the friend I couldn't save. After Jake was found, things didn't go back to normal, if they ever could. His eyes were empty, like a shell of the person I once called my best friend. Every time I visited, the silence between us grew heavier, filled with things unsaid and fears too big to face out loud. One night, Jake told me something that chilled me to my core. He said the shadow wasn't just a visitor, it was a part of his past that refused to let go. "It's feeding off my pain," he whispered, "and it's waiting for me to break completely." His voice cracked, revealing a fragility I had never seen before. I wanted to help him, but I felt powerless against something I couldn't understand. The apartment felt like a trap, a place where light struggled to survive. I knew that shadow was still there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for its next chance. Weeks later, Jake disappeared again. This time it was longer. When he returned, he was different, more distant, less human. He never spoke about where he'd been, only that the shadow had followed him. I could see it in the way he moved, like he was being pulled by something unseen. One evening, as I was leaving his place, I glanced back at his bedroom window. For a brief moment, I saw a figure standing behind the curtain, a shadowy shape that didn't belong. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Jake wasn't alone anymore. Whatever it was part of him now. That night I made a choice. I told Jake I couldn't watch him disappear into darkness. I told him I was leaving, hoping that maybe, somehow, distance would help us both. As I walked away, I felt the weight of those unseen eyes following me down the street. I still wonder what happened to Jake. Was it the heartbreak that broke him, or the shadow that claimed him? Sometimes I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that dark figure lurking nearby. I don't know if it was ever really him or something else pretending to be my friend. All I know is, some wounds don't heal and some shadows don't fade, even in the brightest light. I never told anyone else about what I saw. Some things are better left in the dark. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. This happened 2 years ago, and I still haven't found a solid explanation. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's pets more than their names. My dog, Tucker, is a golden retriever, overly friendly and way too trusting. I never let anyone else walk him, ever. It's not that I don't trust people. It's that Tucker has a routine. Same time, same path, same leash looped through my fingers. He's gotten used to it, and honestly, so have I. Walking him has always been a calming part of my day, even when things in life felt uncertain. But last fall, something shifted. It started small. One morning I grabbed Tucker's leash, whistled, and he didn't come. I found him lying near the back door, panting harder than usual like he'd just gotten home. His fur had twigs tangled in it and his paws were slightly dirty. I hadn't let him out yet that morning. I checked the locks. Everything was shut. No open windows, nothing broken, no sign of forced entry. It didn't make sense. Maybe I was misremembering. Maybe I'd let him out half asleep and forgot. That idea didn't sit right, but I let it go. You have to sometimes, or you'll drive yourself crazy. A few days later, it happened again. I woke up early, and Tucker was already waiting at the door, leash coiled by his paws. He wagged his tail but seemed off, almost cautious. His water bowl was empty, and when I bent down, I noticed something else. His collar was buckled differently than how I normally do it. I stood there for a long time, staring at him. Dogs don't walk themselves. Someone had to be doing this. But no one had keys to my house. Not friends, not neighbors, not even family. I checked my locks again, installed a simple indoor camera by the door, and decided to pay closer attention. That night I stayed up. I didn't want to sleep. I kept one eye on the camera feed and the other on Tucker. Around 3:12 a.m. I nodded off. When I jolted awake 40 minutes later, the leash was gone. I ran to the camera footage, hands shaking. I was not prepared for what I saw. The footage skipped. A 5-minute block was missing. 1 second Tucker was sleeping near the couch, the next he was gone. The time jump was clean. No stutter, no freeze, just a gap. I rewound and watched again, trying to catch anything, even a shadow. Nothing. It was like reality had blinked. The next morning Tucker was back, curled up in his usual spot near the door. He looked exhausted but unharmed. His leash was neatly coiled next to him again, like someone had gently returned it. My heart was pounding as I inspected the door, the locks, even the windows. Everything was perfectly normal, too normal. I went over the camera footage again, trying to pull deleted segments. Nothing worked. The missing time had been cleanly wiped. I started feeling paranoid, double-checking every noise, even carrying a flashlight around the house at night. Tucker stayed close to me now, quieter than usual, as if he sensed I was on edge. That afternoon, I took him for a walk myself. Watching how he moved, he was hesitant, constantly looking around corners or stopping as if expecting someone to appear. When we passed the vacant house 2 doors down, he whined, tugged at the leash, and stared at the porch like it meant something. I hadn't thought about that house in years. It had been empty since the previous owners moved away. Grass overgrown, shutters hanging, mailbox stuffed with old flyers. But when I looked at it that day, something felt different. There was a metal hook on the porch railing and a worn dog leash hanging from it. I walked up slowly, Tucker digging his heels in behind me. The leash was old, frayed at the edges, but the clip was new and shiny. As I reached for it, I noticed something carved into the porch post. Letters, faint but intentional. It said, "Good boy," over and over, scratched into the wood. That night, I set up more cameras, one outside facing the front, one near Tucker's bed, one in the hallway. I stayed up again, watching the feeds. Hours passed with nothing, but around 3 a.m. the hallway camera started to flicker, just faintly, like something heavy moved just outside its view. The front camera caught it next. The porch light blinked off for 2 seconds. When it came back, the leash was gone from the hook. I blinked, leaned in closer, and swore I saw movement. Something stepping back into the shadows just beyond the hedges, but I couldn't make out any features. I turned to the living room feed. Tucker was gone. The leash that had been by the door had vanished again. I scrambled to the front door and flung it open, but the street was empty. I stood there barefoot, heart racing, the wind carrying a faint jingling sound, like a collar in motion. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Tucker came back just after dawn, same as before, curled up by the door like nothing had happened. But this time, there was mud on his paws and a faint smell like wet leaves and old metal. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor. I checked the cameras again. The moment between 2:55 and 3:05 a.m. was missing on all of them. That exact stretch, again, cut cleanly out. I called a friend who worked with security systems, and he said it wasn't possible unless someone accessed the footage physically, but my doors had been locked. That evening, I finally called animal control. I didn't even know what I was reporting exactly. I just said a strange person was taking my dog without permission. They brushed it off, suggested maybe a neighbor was being helpful. I didn't know how to say, "It's not a neighbor," without sounding insane. That night, I slept with Tucker in my room and wedged a chair under the door handle. It didn't matter. Around 2:50 a.m., I woke to the sound of scratching. Soft, slow, steady, on the outside of the door. Tucker growled low in his throat, backing up into the corner of the room. I whispered his name, trying to keep him quiet. Then I saw the doorknob move, just slightly, as if someone was testing it from the other side. The chair wobbled under the pressure. I held my breath, too scared to speak. The scratching stopped, but I didn't dare move. The next morning, there were muddy paw prints leading from my front door all the way down the street. I followed them as far as I could. They stopped right in front of the vacant house. The leash was hanging there again, wet, twisted, and tied in a loose knot around the railing. I left town for a few days, stayed with my cousin an hour away. Tucker seemed relieved, calmer, even playful again. I started to think maybe it was just stress. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. But the night before we returned, I got a text from my home security app. Motion detected. Front door. 3 a.m. I opened the alert, heart racing, and played the short clip. The porch light flickered. The door camera caught a brief, distorted shape, something tall, thin, and pale leading Tucker down the front steps. His tail wagged once, then he disappeared into the dark. I never saw him again after that night. No paw prints, no leash, no signs of struggle, just silence. And once a week, without fail, the porch light blinks at 3:01 a.m., always for exactly 2 seconds, long enough I've learned for someone to disappear.